clenching his jaw and tightening his grip on the rifle. Gevri turned to look at the other soldiers posted at the watchtower and sensed the same nervous tension. Some of it must be due to Jix. Even though she was perfectly behaved, people just weren't used to being this close to a cat who could crush a man's skull in a heartbeat. But Gevri could guess what was really troubling the soldiers: being this close to an archon. The archons were the only soldiers who had the psychic abilities known as Dominion. After being kept secret for years, the archon units had been introduced to the regular troops a few months ago. Though the regular soldiers were under orders to accept the archons, most were uncomfortable being around people with Dominion. Telekinesis, the ability to move and manipulate objects with the mind, didn't sit well with them. They were even less comfortable around Gevri's unit, whose archons were the only ones who had other, rarer forms of Dominion, such as telepathy, the ability to read minds, and remote viewing, the ability to see things many miles from where you stood. While Gevri understood the soldiers' discomfort, he knew that once they saw how helpful Dominion was in battle, they would embrace the archons. Gevri walked along the wall of the watchtower. He'd never been this far west and north before. The climate was much drier than his hometown of Kanjai. It had been dark when his transport had arrived last night, and this morning he was eager to get a sense of the land. Sweeping his gaze over the horizon, he saw very few trees. The hills were covered with wild grasses and shrubs. The late summer had turned the rolling hills a golden color that made him think of sand dunes. His military training took over as he surveyed the ripples and folds of the land. If a small group of soldiers wanted to hide from the sentries, they would have plenty of places to choose from. "That's why we're here," Gevri whispered to Jix. The jaguar stretched her legs out and lowered her head. It was her way of saying she was eager for action, ready for anything. 10 days earlier, the Now Army had launched a full-blown attack on the Ohandai defense facility. Gevri and his strike force had been far away, assisting in the skirmishes in the northern lake region. But he'd heard about the surprise attack and the heavy losses. The Republicites managed to repel the Now and hold the facility, but Ohandai wasn't out of danger yet. The facility was in desperate need of supplies and reinforcements, which would take at least another week to arrive. In the meantime, Ohandai was vulnerable. The Now could very well send in a small strike force of its own and breach the gates of the weakened facility. It was Gevri's job to make sure that didn't happen. A wave of confidence swelled inside him. His unit was perfectly suited for this mission. Though they were all young, just kids, really, they had been chosen because of their rare powers: clairvoyance, remote viewing, psychometry, telepathy, and retrocognition. It was funny to think that it had taken an infidel from Nathan's city to bring these archons' talents to light. Before the arrival of the Nathanite Taemon, these young archons had been thought powerless because they didn't exhibit the usual form of Dominion, telekinesis. But thanks to Taemon, everyone knew of their rare and extraordinary gifts, and General Sarin knew just what to do with them. The general had begun developing Dominion in young soldiers when Gevri was born. At 17, Gevri was the oldest archon by a good 5 years, the first one the general had trained. In addition to telekinesis, Gevri had telepathy. As far as anyone knew, he was the only archon with 2 forms of Dominion, a fact of which his father was especially proud. Gevri's team might be young, but the Special Archon Strike Force was skilled. They were trained, and they would not fail. 6 days later, Gevri and his team knew the layout of the Ohandai facility from stem to stern. They had repelled several attacks already, and it was obvious what the enemy was targeting: the transmissions room, the power generator, and the watchtowers. He'd split the Archons into groups of 2 and 3 to make sure all 3 targets were defended. The strategy had succeeded so far, but Gevri knew enough to guard himself from overconfidence. One mistake could mean losing the entire facility to the Now. The Now. 200 years ago, 9 of the most powerful nations of the world